Hey everybody, today in this video, I'm going to walk through how to do an analysis of variance or an ANOVA. And more specifically, what we're doing here is a between subjects one-way ANOVA. So that means that we have more than two independent groups. In my example, we have three. There's three independent groups, and we want to compare the average score across all three groups to see if there are any differences. And so we're going to do a between subjects. That just means different people independent of each other in at least two or more groups. So we have three independent groups of people. So totally different people. And there's small groups for my example. We just have four people in each group, but four different people. So four people in group one, different four people in group two, and again, a different four people in group number three. So in this example for the ANOVA, our independent variable, or we will call it a factor when we're doing an analysis of variance, is time of day. So everyone's going to have a task they perform, like they all perform the same task. The only difference between the three groups is the time of day that people are performing this task. So our factor or independent variable is time of day. We have three levels, and there's a morning level, there's an afternoon level, and a night level. Right? So morning, afternoon, night. Those constitute our three groups for time of day. Now, what we're measuring all three groups for is critical thinking. So we're giving them all a pretty standardized critical thinking test, and we want to see if there are any differences on average on time of day for when people take the test. So that's what we're going to put into SPSS. So it's one-way ANOVA, between subjects, one-way ANOVA. So we have, in this case, three independent groups of people. And we want to see if there are any differences between these three groups on average for critical thinking, depending on the time of day that they take the critical thinking test. What do you all think? Is there a better time of day for you if you were to take a critical thinking test? Would you be better in the morning, better in the afternoon, or better at night? Let's see how this works out. So I need to share my screen with you. Let me get SPSS ready for us. Whoa, I have a lot of screens open. Where are you, SPSS? You know what? I need to, well, just a sec. I need to close some screens to make this work. I never had that happen before. Zoom couldn't even find it because I had so many windows open. Feels like I'm bragging. I had so many windows open. I couldn't even find it. Okay, let's try it again. All right, there it is. There's my SPSS screen. Okay. So we're going to, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the variables for this study. So go down to the bottom left and click on variable view. That's where we're going to start. We're going to create our variables. So the way that we set this up is very similar to any other test where we're comparing independent groups for means differences. So for our class, it would be very similar to the independent samples t-test, but of course now we have three independent groups in this case instead of just two with the t-test. But as far as like the variable view is concerned, it'll look and feel very much the same, right? You just have to add a third group. So I'm going to call this first one time of day. And remember that you can't use spaces in the names of your variables in SPSS. So I'm just going to time of day all one word. Do you want to abbreviate it? You want to call it like TOD or just like time? You know, whatever works for you, really, as long as you know what it means. So I wrote time of day there. And now, just like with the independent samples t-test, we want to go underneath values, and we want to tell SPSS that we have three different levels of time of day or three different groups. So click on the cell where it says none, and then there's a little blue square. Click that. And I don't know if you can see this screen now in my video, but a little screen popped up and it says value labels, and we want to add in the three levels here. So if you can't see this, I'm just going to describe what I'm doing. And we're going to click on the green plus, and that opens up these boxes for us to write in. And the values, those are the numbers. And we're going to call group one, 1. So type in a number 1 underneath value. And for label, we're going to call this one morning. So I typed in morning. Number 1 is morning. Now hit the plus sign. And let's do the same thing for the second group. We're going to use number 2 as our value. And this is going to be the afternoon group. So type in afternoon under label. And we're almost done with it. We got to create one more group. So hit the plus sign again. And for this group, it's our third group. So I'm going to put value number 3. And I'm going to label group number 3 night. Right? So 1 is morning, 2 is afternoon, 3 is night. And then once you type that, all 3 groups in, their values and their labels, hit OK. And the last thing we need to check for time of day is underneath measure where it says unknown. I'm going to change this to nominal because while we are using numbers 1, 2, and 3, they don't have any mathematical value. They're just to keep track of which group each participant is in. Are you in group 1 or 2 or 3? Okay, so time of day, we're good to go. That variable is created. Now we need to create, excuse me, what we're measuring everybody for, which are their critical thinking abilities. So we got this nice psychological, standardized critical thinking test that we're going to give everybody. I'm just going to call this variable thinking. Right, so I give the name for the second variable thinking, and everybody's getting measured the same. We don't need to indicate that there are different groups here. We just want to set this variable to scale. So underneath measure, set the variable thinking to scale, and then we're good to go. Right? We got our 2 variables set up now. Now we just need to enter in our data. So go down to the bottom left to data view, and you can see the 2 variables we created in the columns right up here in the top left. So we got time of day and thinking. So time of day, all we're doing in this column is keeping track of which group each participant is in. Are they in group 1 or group 2 or group 3? So all you're going to see in this column are 1s and 2s and 3s. They're numbers, but again, there's no mathematical value of these numbers. It's just what group people are in. So I'll tell you ahead of time, there are 4 people in each group. There's 4 people in the morning group, 4 people in the afternoon group, 4 people in the night group. So I'm going to do, for those 4 people who are in group 1, I'm going to tell SPSS, okay, person number 1 is in group 1, person number 2 is in group 1, person number 3 is in group 1, person number 4 is in group 1. So we should see 4 1s there. And then there's going to be 4 people in each group. So just below that, we're going to enter in 4 number 2s. All right, so those 4 people are in group number 2. And you can see, right, okay, we're up to 8 people in our study now. Right, but what about these last 4 people in our study? Well, they are in group 3. All right, so we have group 1. We've got people in group 2. And we've got people in group 3, 4 of each. Cool. Now we just need to, underneath the thinking variable, just go 1 column over to the right, and we're going to enter in the critical thinking score for each person in each group. So for group number 1, there's 4 people here, and this looks like a 10-point scale. Let me see. Yeah, the highest score is an 8, lowest score is a 1. So I'm guessing here this is like a 1 to 10 type of deal, where the higher the number is, the higher your critical thinking ability. So for the first 4 people, I'll say these numbers out loud so you can type them in with me. Just follow along. It is a score of 4, 3, 5, 4. Okay, now group number 2, we have a scores of 3, 1, 3, 1. And then for group number 3, these are people who are taking the test at night. We get scores of 8, 4, 6, and 6. Now we've got everybody's data in. Kind of tough to see where the differences will be and where they won't be looking at the raw data. It starts to get a little confusing the more groups you have. Harder to predict just like eyeballing it, right? All right, now to run the analysis, we're going to go up to Analyze in the menu, down to Compare Means. And you can see all the other t-tests in there, right? So we've already done all those. But click on the one-way Anova. That's where we want to be. And this little window pops up. I don't know if you can see this on the recording. So I'll try to describe it to you just in case you can't. So we have on the left, we have a blue box, and we have our 2 variables there, time of day and thinking. And we want to move them both over, but we want to put them in the right place. So you see we have two options for moving the variables over, one called dependent list and one called factor. Okay, so dependent list, that one, I hope it feels intuitive. That's your dependent variable. This is what you're measuring. And for us, that's thinking, right? We're measuring critical thinking for everybody involved in our study. So put thinking into dependent list. And then underneath that, we have this box that says factor. And factor, remember, that's just another name for independent variable. And for us, our factor is the time of day that our participants took this test. So move time of day into factor. But we're still not done. There's a couple things we want to hit here to get all the information that's relevant, especially the descriptive information, but then also some, post hocs that we need for this test too. So I'm going to click first let me see, the post hoc button. So over on the right, you see it says contrast, post hoc options, bootstrap. Hit post hoc, and we have all these different options. If we have equal variances assumed, and we have some options down here for equal variances not assumed. But we're going to look at the ones on top. And look at all these. The only one we're going to use for our class is it's nice when it's conservative. We're going to use Tukey. So click on Tukey and then hit continue. So now SPSS will give us the post hocs that we want. And now click on options. And here what I like to get are the descriptives. So give us the means and the standard deviations for all the groups individually and also combined. So hit descriptive. And, oh, you know what? Let's hit a means plot here as well. I think that'll give us a graph. We'll see what happens. And then hit continue. That's all we really need to do. So hit OK. Okay, so now we've got our output, but let me switch my screen so you can see my output. Let me stop sharing for a second. Howdy. All right, so let's look at this output right there. Okay, so on the output, we have a lot to look at here. At the top, this first table, it says descriptives. This will show us the means and standard deviations and the sample size for each group. So we knew we had 4 people in each group. We say here underneath N, so morning, afternoon, night, 4, 4, and 4. And now let's look at the mean. So the average score for critical thinking for morning is a 4. The average critical thinking score for afternoon is a 2, and the critical thinking score for night is a 6. Okay, now I think there's going to be some differences here, right? Now that we look at it that way. The standard deviations are, yeah, there's some variability there, but we're going to move on anyway for the sake of practice. Okay, let's move down to this table. Next table down where it says Anova, and you've got your sums of squares. This is the Anova summary table, is what this is called. So you got the sums of squares here, you got degrees of freedom, your mean squares, your F, your significance level. So here, think about, the Anova really being done in 2 parts as far as, the interpretation of your analysis goes. The first is you're interpreting what are called primary effects or main effects. So this means, like, without even looking into the detail of the levels of your factor. So in our case, it's like without getting into the details of which group you were in, morning, afternoon, or night, just like in general, does it matter what time of day? Just in general, without saying there's 3 groups, just like in general, does time of day matter for critical thinking? Then we can look here at the results in the Anova summary table. So we got our degrees of freedom between and within, 2 and 9. So that lets us know degrees of freedom between groups is how many groups there are, minus 1. So if there's a 2 there, we know, okay, there's 3 groups, right? Okay, this is a simple Anova, 3 groups. And then degrees of freedom within groups, it's a 9. So this tells you the total number of people, subtract the number of levels. So there's 3 levels. So that means we subtracted 3 and got 9. So 9 plus 3 is 12. So there's 12 people in the study. So you can read that pretty quickly with practice. I know you guys are just learning now, so it's not that easy, but let's move on to the F obtained value and the significance value. So if we were to do all these formulas by hand, at the very end, our F obtained would be a 10.286 or 10.29 if you want to round it. All right, so that's our F value or F obtained. And here's the significance level. we ended up with a 0.005. So this tells you, the probability that your results are due to a type 1 error is 0.005. So that's, just about a 0% chance that your results are due to a type 1 error. So cool. So we got a main effect. We got a primary effect. That means, yep, time of day does impact critical thinking. So by the way, like if right here, this number underneath significance was greater than 0.05, then we would just stop. There'd be no need to go on, because we'd say all these groups are essentially representing the same population. So time of day doesn't matter. And we wouldn't go on to elaborate how it doesn't matter. We would just be finished with our ANOVA. So luckily, that's not what we found. We found that time of day does matter. So now we want to know, okay, more specific detail. Time of day matters, but which time of day do people have the best critical thinking score? Because we've got 3 different times of day. And so let's look down here. We're going to go past this one. We're going to go to our multiple comparisons table. These are the post hoc results. So post hoc, after the fact. So the fact in this case that there is a primary effect. So, okay, after the fact that there is a primary effect, let's get into more detail. So we're going to look here. This you read it as a matrix. So you're looking at morning. And if we follow that straight across to afternoon, you'll get the results comparing morning to afternoon. If you go morning and then just go down slightly and go over to the right, morning to night, and follow that row straight across, that's going to compare morning to night. So there's really 3 comparisons we want to look at, right? So think about it this way, like morning versus afternoon, morning versus night, and then also afternoon versus night. So we want to find out if there are any differences anywhere among those 3 possibilities. So what we're going to look to determine that is right here in this column where it says sig, right? This is a significance level. And it's the same rule we've been using, right? Compare this number to our alpha level of 0.05. If the number here underneath sig is greater than 0.05, it means that there's too much error for us to accept that we reject the null hypothesis. So we assume those 2 groups are the same, right? If the number is less than 0.05, then we would say, all right, we can reject that these 2 groups' averages are the same. And in fact, they represent different populations of people. So let's find out what happened, right? So we're going to do morning versus afternoon first. So we look at morning right on top, go straight across to afternoon, and follow this row to the significance column. It looks like we've got a 0.112. So that means there's about 11% chance or a 0.11 probability that our results are due to type 1 error. That might seem small to you, but that's too big for our standards. Our comparison number is 0.05. So no difference in critical thinking when looking at morning or afternoon. All right, well, that's good to know. That's interesting. Okay, so what about morning and night? Let's see, right? So if we look at morning in the top left there and go over to the right column at night and go straight across, it's just a coincidence we got the same number, but we got a 0.112 again. So, okay, there's no difference between morning and night for critical thinking scores. So participants take this test during the morning or the night, we'd expect the same thing. So they represent the same population of people. And look at this list. Do we see any under 0.05? It looks like we do, right? It's got to be our last one then. If we compare afternoon and night, we get a significance value of 0.004. So that's less, that's 0.004. So it's less than 0.05. So we can say, all right, there is a difference here between afternoon and night. So a significant difference between critical thinking compared afternoon to night, no difference when comparing morning to afternoon, and no difference when comparing morning to night. That's an interesting result, isn't it? So we want to go back and look at afternoon and night and figure out, all right, so then, let's look at the original average and find out, well, which group did better, right? Afternoon and night. So let's check it out. Afternoon critical thinking score was a 2 on average. Remember, a higher score means like more critical thinking. So it's pretty low on a 10-point scale. It's a 2. Compared to at night, the average is a 6, right? So it's like triple the score right? To go from a 2 to a 6. So that makes sense. It makes sense to me then that just looking at the averages. Oh, sure, of course, people who took these tests at night did better than the afternoon. Interesting, right? Interesting to know. Um, so let's look at, oh, here are the results of the test on a graph. It's a means plot graph. I don't really like these graphs, but it's an acceptable one. Yeah, so it's showing us the difference between afternoon and night. So it's like blue is the lowest point on the graph, the highest point on the graph. So that makes sense. All right, so cool. We found the primary effect, time of day matters. And you go, well, how does it matter? Well, it matters if you're taking this test in the afternoon versus taking it at night. So if you have the option between the two, let's say take this test at night. Looks like most people do better if they do so. Okay, so I hope that helped you out. Give you a little refresher, a little review about how to set up and interpret the results for an analysis of variance. And I will talk to you all next time we're looking at SPSS. All right, bye.